Now we have our second speaker, the Honourable Dr. Kay Patterson AO, who is, as Joe pointed out, our second Age Discrimination Commissioner. Dr. Patterson has been Age Discrimination Commissioner since July 2016. She has demonstrated a strong interest in issues affecting older people throughout her professional life. She has a PhD in psychology and has worked as an academic in health education, especially focusing in the area of gerontology. She co-developed the first Victorian postgraduate diploma in gerontology and introduced gerontology into the undergraduate behavioural science courses. She was elected to the Senate in 1987 and served as a cabinet minister in the portfolios of health and social security, retiring from politics in 2008. Kay has served on a number of not-for-profit boards and voluntary positions and was appointed as an officer of the Order of Australia in 2016. And we know that far too few women get appointed as Orders of Australian officers. So it's very good to have one of that very small number with us here today. We need more women nominating and being appointed. Welcome, Kay.
Thank you very much, Joe. And sorry, Uncle Madden isn't here Uncle Alan isn't here at the moment, but I appreciate very much his welcome to country. It does, I think his father said, where there's a will, there are relatives. My mother used to say, nothing thins blood faster than money. And in this job, I've realised how true that is when we're looking at elder abuse. I want to say thank you to the Benevolent Society and to Joe for the initiative in identifying ageism as a project and an issue to be addressed, and for committing to tackle it. When I was first teaching health science students in the mid-70s, and early 80s, we had one professor of geriatric medicine in Australia and no professors of gerontology or people teaching gerontology. I went to University of Michigan and to Penn State to actually try and find out what they were doing, and actually Butler was very much in the news at that time when he actually was talking about ageism in the States. And really it was a very new area, and my clinical colleagues in the health sciences said, oh, look, they do geriatrics. And I said, well, they do child development. Why do they do that? Why do the health science students do child development? They said, oh, because they need to know about the well child. I said, well, equally they need to know about the well older person. They need, because as families get smaller and young people have exposed to fewer and fewer older people, they do end up with some ideas that are based on maybe one grandmother or grandfather who's not well. And I actually had older people come in and talk about their experience. One of them was a friend of mine's mother who'd got married at 75 to a widow, and she was widowed, and they moved into a house together, not to be in the house that they'd been with their previous partners. Well, I had a double-headed shower in the bathroom. Now, I'm not going to give you all the details of what she said to the students, but that rocked their socks because their parents didn't have touch from each other, and their grandparents even less likely to have any sort of relationship physically. And it was to talk to them about when they have an older patient, it's not a hip or a liver, it's a human being who is an older person who's got a life experience, who's loved, who still loves, who's a grandparent, and all the things that they ought to think about their patients. And one of the lovely things is, and I think this is something we need to think about in this campaign, is to get deep changes. And I'm looking at how do you get deep changes in the human resources recruiting agencies? How do you get deep changes in medicine? How do you get in health? How do you get deep changes in all the areas that we need to combat ageism? And was fascinating to me just a couple of weeks last week when somebody came into my office and said, I've got greetings from 3 people for you. And I said, oh, thank you very much, down in Melbourne. And she said, I've got 3 people who did the first intake of your diploma of gerontology, and they're working in our council still on the area of ageing. And I thought, that's the deep change we need. That's the change that we need that's going to actually really make differences. We need some surface change, but we also need some deep change. So that's really important, I think, to look at those things and see how can education play a part in changing attitudes of people who intersect with older people, pharmacists, doctors, recruiters. I'm really aware from my previous experiences, but also from this job about the impacts of age discrimination on a range of areas. Now, earlier the Commission did some work with Susan Ryan, whose shoes are very big to fill. They found that older Australians are subject to a number of negative stereotypes and assumptions, and these in turn fuel discriminatory attitudes and behaviours that can be manifest in a range of different contexts. It can lead to experienced and capable people, as Joe said, being cut out of the workforce, and discrimination at all stages of employment. It can mean older people are invisible or portrayed negatively in media and marketing campaigns. And I happened to be watching the Gruen transfer last night. Did any of you see the Gruen transfer last night? There was quite a section of ageism in there where they were joking, but there was a lot of myths and a lot of ageism underneath that joking. And had I not been speaking today, I might have got up early this morning and rung up the producer, because I do think it was quite ageist. And I remember some time ago, when I was still in Parliament, they had a 100-year-old woman swimming 55 metres at some mature age athletic event. And this person said, oh, well, you know, she swam the 55 yards and she was more wrinkly when she got out than she went in because it took her so long. I was so incensed. I'm on the telephone to the producer saying it was absolutely outrageous. How many of their people could swim 55 metres anyway? And she was 100 years old and it was fantastic. But it was this absolute mocking of this person who'd, at 100, swum 55 metres. I've been working with a young woman in Victoria, and I hope to see her come to Sydney and do the same thing. She started with, in my local area, 10 young people painting a portrait and interviewing and talking to 10 centenarians. And when I opened her little exhibition in the Kew Festival, there were 122 centenarians in 1976 in Australia. There were 85 in my local council area when we actually were doing the opening. For Seniors Week next week, on the 8th of October, she's opening an exhibition of 100 students, having painted 100 old centenarians, and she hopes to come to Sydney and do the same thing. And they're the sorts of things, I think, where she's encouraging young people to talk to older people. I was recently talking to a young woman who runs a program where she gets young people to go in for 6 weeks and talk to and write a story about older people in the nursing home. And then they measure their attitude change afterwards. Quite significant changes. So here's 2 very young people. I'd love to make them ambassadors against ageism, because and I'm sure there are lots more. So we need to enlist young people in this battle too, because they're the ones who are going to create the culture for the future. So we know there's lots of evidence about ageism and its various forms and settings, and we know negative perceptions about ageing and older people affect the health and well-being of that cohort and undermine the ability of people to age well. And what we don't know as much about is why these negative perceptions and beliefs are so entrenched and difficult to change. And I have to admit, myself, my mother was living in America. She came back to live in Australia, and I was working in Canberra and Melbourne, and I thought it'd be much easier as an only child to have her in Melbourne or Canberra, and started to organise her and boss her around. And she said, I'm going back to my magpies and my gum trees. She grew up in Candelo in the south coast, and she was determined to go back there. And suddenly I thought, all the stuff I'd learnt and was teaching, I should heed. And I think some of us are guilty of this ourselves, of thinking we know best for our parents. It was much better for her to be in that little township where she had cousins nearby, and she got herself ensconced into the community. And when she was sick and she was dying, the whole community came in around her. Wouldn't have happened in downtown Camberwell or Curtin in Canberra as easily, if at all. So I think we all have to try and look at our own ageism, and especially the way we sometimes treat our parents as children, because it's got to start with us. So the really important thing about this campaign, I think, is that it's very long-term, that the Benevolent Society is looking at least a decade ahead, which I think is fabulous, because that's going to make those deep changes. So I congratulate the Benevolent Society on initiating this. I'm sorry I haven't been as good a participant in your advisory committee because I'm trying to get all over the country and meet as many people in the 3 areas I'm focusing on, which is elder abuse, people willing to work, being able to work, carrying on with the work of Susan Ryan, and also older women at risk of homelessness. I can only concentrate in a couple of areas, they're the 3, but I've been trying to get around. So hopefully I'll be able to participate more fully in the next stage. But I look forward to the advocacy and the research coming and the results of the implementation of this research that'll come out of here. I look forward to an ongoing relationship with the Benevolent Society, and I think it's absolutely vital that we have a society in Australia where human rights of all people, regardless of how old they are valued and respected. And my last word is, let's all commit to ensuring that we have an Australia in which every age counts. Thank you.